How about my right to vote on zoning? This is one of the biggest tricks that will be used against you. When I got involved in the zoning process originally, I went down to a few meetings, and everybody who was talking, they were talking about the right to vote on zoning. Now, one of the reasons why they wanted the right to vote on zoning is because they figured, well, we do need a growth policy, and we do need a little zoning so that we can enact these different regulations I showed you earlier that the developers like to use. And they would like probably to have what they would classify as good zoning, which is having certain benefits on their property while hindering their competitors' properties and so on and so forth. So anyways, as I went to these meetings, I noticed that the newspaper were saying that these people were all anti-zoning, but I'd look at the language and they would never take it that far. They would never say, I'm against zoning, or I don't want zoning. When I first went into the newspaper, I said, I don't make any bones about it. I want to kill zoning. I wanted to make sure that my language was strong and that everybody knew that I was clearly against it. I wasn't for only stealing a little bit from people or only stealing a little bit from this guy. I want all the property rights, not only for myself, but for everybody in Montana. And so we started with a group called Higher Ground, and it was a coalition of different Republicans, and there might have been a few Democrats, but there were a lot of developers and real estate agents and lots of different interests on there. And when I went to repeal the growth policy, I thought, quite frankly, that a lot of these people would take me in open arms and want to go ahead and do that. But I was severely challenged by several of the members of Higher Ground, one of them being Lee Foss, and of course his wife is now running for county commissioner in Ravalli County. And anyways, they were unable to take full control over Higher Ground because a lot of them didn't get on the board because they didn't want to be shown publicly that they were kind of the puppet masters of Higher Ground. And so they had a breakoff group called CPR, or Citizens for Property Rights. And they really didn't want the growth policy repealed. And I don't know how much zoning they wanted. I know their director, Dallas Erickson, he has admitted several times that he did want some zoning so that he could go after some of his moral interests and, try to regulate business and all kinds of things. But it seemed to me that they came out with an initiative that ran kind of alongside with the growth policy repeal, which is that we'd all have the right to vote on zoning. Problem is, like we talked about earlier, everybody in the county would have the right to vote on this, and so the vote was skewed, and they did, unfortunately, there were a lot of great people in Citizens for Property Rights who did a lot of work to repeal the growth policy, but unfortunately, the leadership in open meetings, it was kind of unpopular for them to openly be against the growth policy. So they'd kind of waffle and sit on the fence and say, well, it would be a good idea if we could get it accomplished, but I don't think we can do it. And then if we don't do it, then here's the Republicans looking bad again, and so on and so forth. So they did every slippery thing they could to not openly oppose it publicly. They would do it with me and to my face, but publicly they never would. And so there was a whole bunch of people on the Citizens for Property Rights who were kind of duped by the leadership, unfortunately. And the leadership finally came out with a plan, and they said, well, Citizens for Property Rights isn't going to support the growth policy repeal because we're a 501c4 or whatever they were, but you can just file as an incidental committee and go ahead and be for these things. Now, they had their own initiative, which they had no problem supporting. And so a lot of these things were just smoke and mirrors. And so they really probably should have named themselves Citizens for Some Property Rights, because I do believe they didn't want as harsh a zoning as the communists, but they did want some zoning. I'm not talking about, the good people who were duped or misled by this leadership on there. I think you know who you are, and you shouldn't be offended by this because you know your heart was in the right place. I'm specifically talking about the people who knowingly were trying to undercut the growth policy repeal. The ones who didn't gather signatures, the ones who didn't sign it, the ones who were talking, behind everybody's back. So what I found anyways is that we had two different kinds of groups. We had one group which was Friends of the Bitterroot, and they had a lot of offshoots like Be Cool and Ravalli County Future, and this was kind of the environmentalist left who had some developer interests, but they were against the growth policy repeal. And then you had the Republicans who were against the growth policy repeal, and most of them resided under this banner of Citizen for Property Rights, which of course is kind of a renaming. But anyways, I went down through all the articles that had ever been printed by the newspaper, and I was just looking for specific language of like Lee Foss saying, I'm against zoning and I want to keep property rights, and he never did that anywhere I could find. The only thing I could find is that he would say, well, not this zoning, or let's vote on zoning. Well, I don't want to vote on my rights. I just want to keep them. If you vote on it, then it's just a privilege. So we've talked about UN Agenda 21, and we've talked about how the Democrats fought it, and a lot of the Republicans fought it. But you got to ask yourself, where is the money coming from? How much money was there? And so this is the Brainerd Foundation, and they're a nonprofit group out of Washington who funds a lot of UN Agenda 21 around the country. What they do is they target counties or cities that they want to implement it in, and then they dump a bunch of money in there. And I think one of the reasons that they do it is because they feel like in that particular area they have everybody in place they need to support the zoning. And so what I've been trying to paint a picture of the best I can is that I think they felt they had everybody in place because they had the Democrats in place and they had the Republicans in place. They had the state legislators and county commissioners and everybody in place, and a lot of people on the central committees and in the state party and so on and so forth. So they had done their homework, got their people in place, and so they started dumping money in. So if you go to their website, you can take a look at their grants. Now, all of this is off their website, and this is their words, not mine. Ravalli County 2008, they gave $110,000 to support planning and implementation of Ravalli County's growth policy. Bitterroot Land Trust, they gave $25,000 for a planning enhancement program. Here's another big one at the bottom, 2007, $100,000 to support planning and implementation of Ravalli County's growth policy. Bitterrooters for Planning, they gave $3,000. And here again it says Ravalli County to become actively involved in the county-wide planning and zoning effort. But see, this is just one organization. And they've given close to $400,000 that we can find to different organizations within our county in order to promote this UN Agenda 21. The Sonoran Institute, here's another $100,000. It's to conserve the distinct natural areas and quality of life of the High Divide in Missoula and Ravalli County by working with rural landowners, community leaders, elected officials, and the development community to identify and protect these unique values. So here they're even, admitting that they're giving a grant to go work with elected officials to get this done. So it's pretty interesting. Why would they spend so much money on little old Ravalli County? Well, one of the reasons is because in Missoula we hardly have any county-wide zoning. And in fact, I think most of the counties that have it, it's only in specific areas. Now, a lot of the incorporated cities do have zoning, but I think what they figured is if they can get it done in Ravalli County, and they have all the people in place, and they're a long ways down the process, then they would be able to, like a plague, spread it all over Montana.